Financial argument. Follow us on YouTube.
Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, as we know, President Obama over the weekend approved bombings inside of Afghanistan. And we're starting to realize at this point, troops, they're not coming home. Actually, they're going to be ramping up the troops in Afghanistan because we see what's happening at this point. The U.S. now is on the verge of making war with Russia, with China, with North Korea, with Syria, with Iran, with the BRICS nations. So at this point, the United States, they are asking allies and helping with the security in Afghanistan. And they want everyone to maintain funding for the Afghan forces at a cost of nearly $5 billion a year until the year 2020. And this shows us that there's no way that any of these troops are coming home. Actually, this shows us that they're going to be ramping up the number of troops inside of Afghanistan. And we realize that Afghanistan has a lot of natural resources, but the United States central bankers, the government, is not going to give up. We realize they have the poppy fields, which they create opium, and they pay for their covert operations. There's a pipeline running through Afghanistan. Russia, China are in Afghanistan. It's a strategic location. They are never, ever leaving this area. Now, Russia, they are going to be bringing in troops to Armenia because they are now going to counter the hostilities of Turkey in the region. And Russia, they're realizing what is happening here. And you can see every time NATO makes a move, every time the U.S. makes a move, every time the coalition forces make a move, we see that Russia, they're placing troops in strategic locations because they understand what the U.S. is up to. They understand the dollar is collapsing. This is why they created a similar system to the SWIFT system. China has done the same. This is why they're bypassing the dollar. This is why they're creating a system where they're separate and apart from the West so they can survive throughout war without having to deal with the West whatsoever. Now, NATO, they're ratcheting up their presence near Russia. And on Monday, they announced that they're going to be sending about 4 battalions to the Baltic states of Poland. And we see right now, this is coming right after the largest war game that we've ever seen since the Cold War. And this was the war games around Poland, which was around 31,000 troops and thousands of vehicles, and it involved about 24 countries. And of course, every time we have some type of drill, some of this equipment is left over, the troops are there, and they say they're going to be bringing in even more to be there permanent. Now, of course, their permanent is rotational, but it's still permanent. We see right now that Prime Minister David Cameron, he has announced his approval for a proposed EU army. And Cameron has said he is prepared to allow the Royal Navy warship to help Op Sophia, a mission under the EU's Common Security and Defense Policy. The Navy's involvement marks a tentative step towards an EU military. And we see at this point, the EU is a non-elected government, reports to no country, no people. It is a bunch of central bankers, and they want their own army. Now, back in February, we reported on the leaked document that revealed the EU's plan to expand Operation Sophia in order to move the EU military assets into the Libyan waters, and this was stage 2 of their strategy. And we can see right now, this is exactly what they're doing. They're creating this EU army. They're going to be placing it throughout Europe. Everyone, all these countries are going to be part of it. It will be controlled by the central bankers, and the countries will have absolutely no say in what is going on with their forces. We see the White House right now. They declared a national emergency back in June of 2006 after Belarus held presidential elections. And of course, the United States says this was undemocratic. Of course, not like the elections in Yemen, the elections in Ukraine, elections in Iraq or Libya, or even the United States. Basically, what's happening here is the U.S. didn't get a puppet government inside Belarus. They don't approve of what's going on there. And the U.S. national emergency laws allows Washington to impose sanctions on other nations. And this is why they're keeping this up in this country. Because you have to remember, the United States is after regime change. They want puppet governments in certain areas, and they're going to continually push this. Now, we see July 1st is coming up, and we know that Turkey wants visa-free entry into the EU. At the same time, many of the EU countries are shutting down their borders, getting rid of Schengen, saying we don't want this whatsoever. And right now the EU is saying that Turkey has not lived up to what they were supposed to do. They're not ready to have this. And it's not going to happen on July 1st. Now, Erdogan, he warned last month that if this doesn't go through, he's going to release the refugees. The deal is off. Now, we'll have to see what Erdogan does. Maybe he'll back down, or maybe he'll go through with it, and we'll have complete chaos throughout Europe. This is something that we need to watch. Now, Turkey introduced a bill to grant soldiers fighting terrorists immunity. Now, what this allows the military to do is they can pretty much do whatever they want. And all they have to say, this is a terrorist. They're not held accountable. And Turkey's parliament, they introduced a bill to allow this to happen. And in the bill, any offense committed by the security services will be deemed a military crime and will be tried in a military court. Another aspect of the bill, the investigation and trial processes of commanders and the Chief of General Staff, will also require the Prime Minister's permission. So it looks like Turkey is getting ready to use their forces in a way that is going to allow them to do whatever they want. In addition to all of this, it will enable army commanders to issue emergency search warrants for houses on the spot. So are they really search warrants? No, they're just going to say it's approved, go in, and you can search the home. So this is turning into a full-blown dictatorship. And we're going to have to watch this situation very carefully because this most likely is going to get out of hand. Now we see that the Syrian armed forces in Syria, Russia, the U.S. moderate rebels and the U.S. special op teams, along with the U.K. and France, they are battling in Raqqa. And it seems that the U.S. would like to keep control of Raqqa because this might upset the federalization plan of dividing Syria up. And when we look back in time, like back into 1922, France actually was trying to do this after World War I. They divided the entire area up into different regions. One of the regions was the state of Aleppo. The other region was the state of Damascus. Then there was an Alawite state. There was Greater Lebanon. But the whole thing didn't work and fell apart. But we can see their goals are always the same. Nothing has really changed that much in what they wanted to do in this area. What they're trying to do is maintain control of all of these areas somehow, some way, and it's becoming more and more difficult as time goes on. Now, we realize that things are starting to heat up in the Middle East. We understand that France, they are building a military base in Syria, just like the United States, who is building 2 of them. We know Germany, they're upgrading a base in Turkey. We see there's a travel advisory. There's an advisory in Libya to all Americans to get out now. We see more and more military assets being brought into Syria. And now the Oklahoma National Guard Alpha Company, 777th Aviation Support Battalion, they're heading to the Middle East. They're going to provide aviation support for this entire operation in the Middle East. So we're already seeing the National Guard being brought out into this area. And when we start adding all these things up all together, we're starting to realize that this next event, whatever they're planning, is going to be absolutely huge. And we need to watch this situation very carefully, because most likely this is going to start World War III. Now, we all understand, and we're hearing so much in the corporate media, a lot of propaganda coming out about the Orlando shooting. And I wanted to take a moment here to break down all the different information that we have that the corporate media is not even mentioning. Because if they start to mentioning it, people are going to question it. And once they start questioning it, they're going to say, this really doesn't make any sense. Now, there's a lot of news reports, and I want to thank all those people that have been sending me videos and information on this, that there are many people out there, and I mentioned this yesterday with a search, where there were multiple shooters that were roaming around the club area. And we have to realize that this shooter, Omar, which, of course, as we can see right now, is a patsy, he was calling 911 during the shooting, saying that he pledged his allegiance to the Islamic State. He also mentioned the Boston Marathon bombers in the call, while holding his assault rifle and his pistol, shooting everyone at the same time, which really doesn't make sense in itself. But let's go along with the narrative of this story, and let's just go along with what the corporate media and the government's trying to tell us. Now, like I said, there are eyewitnesses out there who said there were multiple shooters. And then there was another video that was done where someone was reporting, and this is coming from Dabu 7, where they were saying that someone was holding the doors closed, not letting people out, and then all of a sudden they were cut off. And the whole thing just disappeared. So this is kind of strange in itself. So we have multiple shooters and someone holding the doors closed so nobody can leave. People are saying that I'm pretty sure it was more than one person. I heard 2 guns going off at the same time in 2 different directions. And they're saying that the shooters were rapid firing, like a machine gun. And, of course, everyone was running around in chaos and things were crazy inside of there. And some other people reported that there were one other shooter because they were hearing firing from a different location. So already we're getting a different story from what the eyewitnesses heard while they were in the club. Now, we have to go and look at this person, Omar. He worked for G4S, which is a British multinational private security company. This is the world's largest by revenue. It has already been exposed as having ties with Israel and the security intelligence apparatus of CIA, MI6, Mossad. Omar Mateen was employed by G4S at a residential community in South Florida and was off duty at the time of this incident. And Mateen was subject to detailed company screening when he was recruited back in 2007. So he's not new to this. He's been around since 2007. Now, very interestingly, this G4S, they're connected to 9/11 and Guantanamo. Their name that they used to go by was Securicor. And G4S provided security at all 3 airports affected by 9/11 attacks. G4S had bought Argent Bright Security, the 9/11 airport security firm, just 9 months before the 9/11 attacks. The company later ran operations at Guantanamo Bay. Very interesting. G4S, which has the first contract security company to receive designation and certification by DHS, also helps the government with emergency security responses to terror threats. They employ more than 50,000 Americans. And we see right now is that G4S provides security support for several other agencies in the United States. And that would be the Justice and Energy Departments, the Department of State, the Interior, the Labor Department, the IRS, Drug Enforcement Administration. The security firm also partners with U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, and NASA. Now, Judicial Watch says the very same G4S has been the company contracted by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to transport illegal immigrants away from the Mexican border to Phoenix, where many cases they would be released without, any type of processing or anything like that. And at many times, this Omar would assist. So he was known to the U.S. government. The FBI admits that they knew about this person. Of course, they're out there saying that, he was a person of interest, because that's what they're going to say. But Omar was subject to detailed screening in 2007, 2009, 2011, 2013, and I think 2015. So we can see at this point, things aren't really making sense. So the alleged killer was known to the FBI. The alleged killer shot before he could speak or be tried. He pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. But something very interesting is that there was a mass shooter drill 3 months and 6 months prior to Orlando. Now, when we look at this, we see that the drill simulated a mass shooting inside. And they had people all over the floor. They had real blood. They had, the fake blood that made it look real. They had amputees where they strap on the legs and things to make it look like their legs were blown off. They had all the emergency teams doing this. And this happened 3 and 6 months prior to this shooting. So let's move on to his father. Now, his father, Sadiq Mateen, well, there's reports that he was running for national office in Afghanistan, and he is photographed numerous times in Washington, D.C., meeting with different politicians, which is very interesting in itself. And the U.S. authorities are now probing the electronics of Omar. Now, of course, who knows? They might come up with that there's encryption, we can't break into it, but most likely, what do you think they're going to find? What happened when they finally broke into the San Bernardino electronic equipment? We've heard absolutely nothing, because their agenda was to get access to all encryption. Now, Obama is put into a tough situation here because there's many different agendas associated with this. One is gun control. The other one is the Islamic State and terror. And remember, the government is controlled by two different sources. One is controlled, the executive branch controlled by central bankers, corporations, Congress, controlled by foreign governments, corporate media, controlled by foreign governments, along with the United States government central bankers. And there always seems to be an instance where these two agendas kind of butt head. Because we can see right now that the president is out there saying that, no, this person did not receive any type of instructions from outside of the United States. He is a homegrown extremist. And we've been concerned about him for a very long time. Well, no, you really haven't. You knew about him because he worked for this security company, which the United States hires and contracts with. Because what's happening here, Obama, he wants to push his gun control forward. If he goes the track of the terrorists, it doesn't make any sense. So he has to back off of that and say that he was a homegrown extremist that had no ties to the Islamic State whatsoever. Now remember, all of this is fake, phony, and false. Because you have to remember one thing that Obama promised before the end of his term, that he would sign the gun control legislation from the United Nations. Right now we know John Kerry signed it. It is in the Senate. And Obama already indicated that he will sign the UN Small Arms Treaty, and he wants Congress to ratify it. And he promised he would do this at the end of his term. This is why we're seeing a lot of this today, because they want this passed. And if this is passed, they're going to say this overrides the Second Amendment, which it really doesn't. But they're going to convince everyone that it does. We're already hearing from different individuals in government, like Senator Bob Casey, who is proposing tightening gun laws, saying that we're going to push legislation through that anyone that is convicted of hate crimes, they will not be able to own a firearm, or if they spew any type of hate, we will reject these people from getting any type of weapon. Which is, what is a hate crime? What is spewing hate? Who's going to decide this? I mean, everyone is out there just using emotion, screaming and yelling, and we're not looking at the facts of what is really going on here. So let's just try to understand what has happened here. There was a 3-hour standoff. How come there's no videos from the inside? All these people, 3 hours, not one video has surfaced inside the club. There was also reports that the gunman was running away. Well, maybe one of the other gunmen were running away, because that's what they normally do. After they commit the crime, those other gunmen, they disappear and they leave the patsy inside. The footage of all these people that were injured, they're telling us 50 people died, 40 plus were injured. Where are all the gurneys? Anyone see them? Shouldn't we see tons of this? I mean, about 100 gurneys out there? We didn't see it. Actually, how many rounds of ammo do you need to shoot 50 people and kill them and injure another 40 or so? Of course, this guy, was he able to carry all of this? He also was reported that he had a pistol in one hand for protection when reloading the assault rifle. Well, how did he reload the assault rifle? That doesn't make sense. And all the people that were explaining how this went down, didn't they seem very calm after they just saw blood, people dying, death? They just escaped this horrific tragedy, and they were very calm in telling their stories. But we can see that most likely, from everything that we've been looking at, that this whole thing was a false flag, maybe even a hoax, because they did this in the middle of the night. The gunman, well, he died. He also pledged his allegiance to the Islamic State. We had a number of drills in the area prior to this. They did it in a dark club where nobody can see anything. And actually, when we talk about the club, how did he walk into the club with an AR-15 or any other type of an assault rifle? You're in Florida. The temperature was 80 plus with about 60% humidity. You know, you're wearing short sleeves, maybe shorts. If he walked in with a trench coat, that's kind of suspicious. How did he get through the guards that were guarding the door? Makes no sense. Now, people say that they heard a machine gun type of weapon. And everyone's saying, well, he went out and he bought this assault rifle. It was fully automatic. Then you hear other stories that, no, it wasn't fully automatic. But people are reporting that it was a machine gun type of weapon. Well, we know you have to wait 5 days, and the FBI runs a background check. But to get any type of machine gun, that's a little bit more difficult. You need a special ATF license, which requires the background check. Then you have to pay a $200 ATF tax. And the BATF will first remove the money order, examine the paperwork for completeness. It will be assigned to an agent who will have a nationwide FBI background check performed on you. Once you pass this, the BATF will mail back one certified copy of the form. On this copy will be a stamp that looks like a postage stamp. This is a federal tax stamp indicating the transfer tax is paid, and the item is officially yours. When you receive this, you need to wait 90 to 120 days after it is mailed in. You have to complete the BATF form 4473 at the store. The 4473 is not called in for the background check since that has already been done, but is kept on file at the store in compliance with BATF regulations. So that was a long, lengthy process for him to get any type of machine gun. So where did this machine gun come from, where he's able to continually shoot and non-stop to kill all these people in the dark, not really having that much training. And I know they said he had some training, but you have to remember he purchased these like on June 2nd or 5th, as they say, allegedly. He waited 5 days, which would bring him right up to the time that he committed all this, which again makes no sense whatsoever. All of this is suspect at this time. And as we see more and more of these videos, especially where there was a video where there was one guy, a couple of guys carrying this one guy, and they started down the street and they carried him all the way to the crime scene, which again makes no sense whatsoever. Why would you do that? Because the whole thing was staged. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared.